I think I mentioned this earlier, but did you know that the church has its own calendar? And by the church, I mean, well, first it was the Catholic Church. They started it because it was a very long time ago, and they were the only game in town at that point. But most churches, nearly everybody, still follows at least parts of it. Like the church year actually starts next year with Advent. And the church year ends today, this week. And it's a day that's sometimes called Reign of Christ because we want it to be a little more inclusive and less monarchy. But it's actually a relatively new holiday in the church calendar, considering a lot of the days we celebrate are really ancient. Some of them go way back before the Middle Ages even. This one started in 1925. Pope Pius XI declared this Sunday Christ the King Sunday. And the reasons for that will disappoint anyone who thinks that no one should talk about politics in church, because Pope Pius XI specifically created this day because of politics. Well, politics and culture, I should say. And I'll read you a quote, and I used it in the email, so you may recognize it if you've read the email already. Pope Pius XI established Christ the King Sunday in 1925 to counter what he regarded as the destructive forces of the modern world. Secularism in the West, the rise of communism in Russia, fascism in Italy and Spain, the harbingers of Nazism soon to seize Germany. Pope Pius intended to oppose the rule of Christ to the totalitarian claims of these ideologies. The Pope in 1925 stood up and said, "It is Christ against fascism. It is Christ against the Nazis. It is Christ against empty materialism, against soulless consumerism, against the kind of capitalism that grinds people into the dust and doesn't recognize the image of God in each and every one of us, that has no moral code and believes in nothing." He stood up and he says, it is Christ against all of these things. And that is so important that we need to make it a day that we come back to every year. We're going to come back to it over and over and over again, because you are not under the rule of these things. And the people who have let themselves be co-opted by it are not worshiping Christ. They are worshiping an idol. Because it is Christ against everything that does not put Christ first, not profit first, not productive citizens first, not America first, not white people who speak English first, and not traditional families first. It is Christ. And Christ has said that the most important commandment is to love God and to love our neighbors as ourselves, like Lori said earlier. Today's Bible verses, the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. People who are watching this online are going to have no idea why we're laughing at that. From the book of Daniel is saying the exact same thing. This is the exact same lesson as Christ the King Sunday. The three heroes of our story have followed this most important commandment. The first, to love God and worship God. And then the entire empire of Babylon, and the empire in particular, are condemned as the villain in this story because they have failed the second part of that rule, to love their neighbor as themselves. And they failed it hard enough to shove their neighbor into a fiery furnace. They are the villain because Nebuchadnezzar thinks he is the ultimate king in this story. But he is wrong. From God's perspective, that man is just another neighbor. And so are the guards receiving their orders. And so are the informants informing on their neighbors. None of these people are more special, and none of them are excused from loving God and loving their neighbor as themselves in the ultimate grand scheme of things. And in this story, God does a reversal of the power structure. The world is turned on its head. And it turns out Nebuchadnezzar doesn't have the ultimate power after all. In a foreshadowing of the reign of Christ that we will be celebrating starting next week in Advent, the lowly are raised high and the high are humbled. Now, I have always thought that this was a genuinely horrific story. In fact, one of the things that I did as a youth pastor before I came here was that I went through all the books and I threw away the board books about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I did not even donate them because children should not read about attempted murder. And even if it's in the Bible, this is not a cute story. We certainly don't think it's a funny story. And it's a story about the kind of bravery that I sincerely hope and pray none of us ever have to face. The kind of bravery that says, I live in the reign of Christ, and you can take my life, but you will not take me out of it. I will not worship the forces of evil. I will not do anything but love God and love my neighbor as myself. And this is a story of a regime that is so horrifying that even its own enforcers are disposable. You'll notice, actually, in a lot of Bible stories, that being a high and mighty attendant to a capricious tyrant often will get you killed as well. The men whose job it was to throw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the fire, their lives didn't matter either. Which is why I've always thought this was a horrifying story about horrifying realities. It's the same kind of realities that pushed Pope Pius XI to create Christ the King Sunday in the first place. The kind of things that have no place within the reign of Christ, within God's vision for this world. Although I actually learned some new and really interesting information about this story this time around when I was doing my research for this sermon. Now, I did know that unlike a lot of other stories from the Old Testament, this story has no outside historical or literary corroboration from any, from archaeological records or from other from other writings of that time. And a lot of those stories do, including Noah, there's actually a lot more supporting evidence for the story of the flood than there is for this story right here. And so that is why people generally assume that this is not a historical event, but it's a theological story that is written for a particular reason. And I had heard that. However, what I didn't know is that this is actually considered to be political satire. It was satire written by those same exiles that we talked about last week. Those exiles who had been sent to live in Babylon. And their whole community had been torn out by the roots and stuck down in the middle of the Babylonian Empire. I had never noticed that this was an act of political satire, and part of that is because of the way that it's translated. And I know that you would not have noticed that because there's actually a lot of the details that clue us in were even cut out of the reading today. Believe it or not, that reading could have been way longer. It's a really long story, and there's no way we could have sat through the whole. Poor Amber, we could have done that to her. So that was the edited version. But some of the things that were cut out were about Nebuchadnezzar, about his rules. They were some things that sort of showed his personality. It was like more details about the statue, and it showed that all of this was like really grossly exaggerated. And that also doesn't come through so well in the translation either, but he swans around saying ridiculous things. Like things like, at the sound of all the instruments, and then they go on and they list like this giant list of instruments. And he's like, yes, at the sound of all the instruments, any instruments, everyone must bow down and worship my giant golden statue. And I think actually that the statue is him. But he's got a big gold statue. But the statue itself is even exaggerated because they don't translate it, but it's 90 feet tall. And it's only 6 feet wide. So if you think about that, it's like a commentary on the rain and all this. But basically, one commentator said that there probably wasn't enough gold in all of Babylon to have actually made this statue. So this is like a political cartoon. I mean, that's what we are dealing with here. And I know that we love political satire still. And it serves all of the same purposes. It serves to unify and fortify those who are in opposition. It serves to point out through exaggeration what is going wrong in a way that can make people see things that that may have been blind to before. It serves to reduce the power of a tyrant by making him ridiculous for things that he richly deserves, even if they are genuinely horrible things. And because this story is satire, there has to be an underlying bite to it. And it's a real bite, because the things that they are joking about, they are terrible things. But there is also that underlying message. There's that moral of the story. There's that lesson that will be learned by the tyrant and anyone who stands in opposition to God. That God is ruler and no one else. The rest of us are just neighbors. No exceptions made. Same demands for all of us. Love God. Love your neighbor as yourself. And if you do not humble yourself before God and love your neighbor as yourself, you are not living in God's reign. You have put yourself in someone else's reign. I mean, we could ask people today, we always think, where are we in this Bible story? We could ask everyone that question. Where are you in this Bible story? Are you one of the people out there informing to the emperor, whispering against your neighbors? Are you one of the people tying up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ready to toss them right in? You can follow the laws of Babylon all you want, but your life will never matter to them. Your life matters in the reign of Christ, where we are to love our neighbor as ourselves, where we care for one another, where we don't let fear and hatred rule us, where we feed people, where we try to make sure all their children have enough, where we shelter those who are hurting and give them space to grow and try to get the support they might need, where each person has dignity and worth that we retain throughout our entire lives. We're not important because of what job we have or how much money we make or what we can do for other people. We are just loved because we're a neighbor, and that's all we have to be. That's what the reign of Christ looks like. And you know where it's going to be this afternoon? Amber made an announcement about it. It's going to be at the Somali Mall in Minneapolis at that great Minnesota potluck. I will show up, I will be wearing my collar, and I will be representing this church so that the media in this state, maybe across the country if we're lucky, will hear that we love and support our Somali neighbors, that we love those neighbors as ourselves, and we will not stand for them being used as a political football. We won't stand for them being sent back to one of the worst humanitarian and political crises in this world because of racist and xenophobic policy and people who fear and hate immigrants who are not rich or white. I will be there this afternoon to say alongside Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, we want you to know, great ruler, that we do not serve those gods. We do not need to defend ourselves before you. The God we serve is able to overcome and rescue us from your hand. But even if God does not rescue us, we want you to know that we will not serve your gods. We will serve Christ instead. Now go and do likewise. Amen.